So, listeners, Mike has been gone for a little while. He just got back a few days ago, and he left me in control of our social media accounts while he was gone. So I did stuff.
Yes, you did.
I did a lot of stuff.
Before I even got back, I had requests for a whole bunch of things.
Yes. I got a bunch of ideas in my head, and I kind of just want to experiment with a few things. So I've been posting quite a bit on the Bookworm Twitter account. So follow that if you're not following it. I created...
At Bookworm FM, for
at
people
Bookworm
who are
FM.
wondering.
I created an Instagram account for Bookworm. Books are surprisingly easy to take pictures of. And I don't know why we haven't done this before, Mike, of just simply taking pictures of the books that we're going through and posting them on Instagram. That seems very logical to me. So
yeah, but the one that really surprised me was that you have a YouTube channel.
Yes. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. So the Instagram account, bookworm.fm on Instagram, I'm starting to post some pictures of the books we're going through. I've been creating like some of these audiograms for the episodes, and I have some more of that I want to do in the future. But in the process of building the audiograms for Instagram and for Twitter, I realized, well, I'll just create one for the entire episode. Well, if that's the case, I might as well post it to YouTube. So now Bookworm has a YouTube channel. It's not a simple URL because I just had the idea and created it not too long ago. So I can't put a custom
YouTube
URL
never
on it.
makes anything simple.
No, it's a pain. But link in the show notes to that channel. If YouTube is where you want to listen to things, you can do that there. It's actually kind of cool. It's an audiogram of the entire episode. So that's all the ones I've created so far are for the Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt book. So those are all out. They're all live. I had a lot of fun while Mike was gone, and then I started asking him for pictures of things and blah, 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 blah. Joe had fun while Mike was gone. That's what that amounts to.
So to add a little bit more detail to this story, I pretty much right after we recorded the last one left for a missions trip to Costa Rica. I scheduled the blog post, so I had edited the episode and it was ready to go, but basically said, can you make sure, Joe, because I'll be out of the country, that things go off without a hitch on that Friday? And you said, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll also tweet about it. And then I went into airplane mode and had no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, and was down in Costa Rica for 8 days. Was working basically from 7 in the morning till after 10 p.m. every single day, except for one day we got to go to the beach right before we came back. I got up at 3:30 to take the international flight back home. And once I got back into the States in Dallas, where my connecting flight was, turned my phone back on and saw all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, Joe, what did you do? I have to admit that my first thought was, this sounds like it's a whole lot more work for me. But as long as you're happy to run with it,
I'm at the
cool
reins
with it. I think it all looks great. I just looks like a lot of effort. The audiogram in particular of the YouTube stuff, I really like those. I think that's super cool. So great job, but don't expect a whole lot of help from me.
Nope. I just need you to edit the podcast and give me the file. That's all I need.
All right, will do.
The rest of it, I was smart in how I did it because we're taught to batch things. So whenever I built all of those, I built them as templates so that I can swap things out very easily. So yes, but it's fun. It's kind of cool to do. Anyway, Joe had
Joe
fun
is
while
back
Mike
on
was
social
gone.
media with a vengeance, making up for lost time.
I guess. I don't know. I kind of got some stuff in my head, and I got to where I was batching a bunch of stuff using Buffer quite a bit. So that way I'm not spending all my time on social media, but I can get things posted there. That's the idea.
There you go.
Anyway, I'm having fun. One thing I do want to point out, one of the ideas that I want to try, and dear listener, hear me out on this, but because I think it would be fun. The Instagram account, I put a tweet out about this. Because one of the things I want to start showing on the Instagram account is pictures of listener libraries. I think it's really cool when people have libraries. I don't care if it's 2 books or 2,000 books on your library, bookshelf, whole wall, entire room dedicated. I don't care. I want to see these pictures because I think it would be cool just to see how people store and organize their books. So I created what would you call it? An email address, libraries@bookworm.fm. Shoot me an email with a picture of your library and let me know what your Instagram username is, and I will post that on our account. Obviously, I'll have to filter some of them, I'm sure, but send those to me and I'll get them tagged whenever those go live. I think it'd be fun. I think it'd just be kind of cool to see what listener libraries look like. So send me your picture, libraries@bookworm.fm.
Which I still need to send you my picture of my library.
Yes. I told Mike I want pictures of his stuff. I need to get pictures of mine taken. One of them's complete nightmare, but I'm going to take a picture of it as it is. But I think it would be fun, and Mike he owes me some pictures now.
I do. You added to my to-do list.
I did, because I can do that, apparently.
Which is the opposite of my first action item.
All right. I'm done with all the social media stuff. Let's go through follow-up stuff.
Okay. And actually, before we get there, I do want to just point out one more time, because I've had a couple people ask me directly, hey, don't you have a coupon code for MacStock? Yes, I do have a coupon code. So as much as I thought we've beat this horse to death, there are still some people who don't know that there is a coupon code to get $70 off for MacStock. So I'll throw it out there one more time, because this will probably be, once this episode is published, the last one before, maybe there'll be one more, before MacStock in July. So MacStockConferenceandExpo.com, and if you use the coupon code FOCUSED at checkout, you will save $70 off of the weekend pass, which is normally $249, so it's $179. It's the same thing as the early bird pricing. So it saves you a good chunk of change. And if you don't have a ticket yet for MacStock and you're thinking about coming, we'd love to see you there, and that code will save you some dough.
And if you come, make sure you wear your Bookworm shirt.
Ooh, that'd be awesome.
That'd be so cool.
All right, now we can get into follow-up.
Hit me. You got 3 things here.
I do. I've got the first one is create a not to-do list. And I did this. There's a handful of things that I just don't ever want to do again. Some of them are bigger, like emails on this list. I've recognized, having been in Costa Rica, not touching email for 8 days, that really I dislike email. I used to say I have a love-hate relationship with email, because I kind of was proud of the fact that I could crank through it in 30 minutes a day or less, even though I got hundreds of emails. Now I just realized that, like, if I had never had to touch this again, I'd be okay with that. So that's on the list. A couple other things. And it's really things that I'm going to have to long-term figure out a way to delegate that type of stuff. But none of it is things that I can immediately stop doing, which was kind of surprising in doing this. I kind of thought there'd be some things that I was like, okay, I should just stop doing this right now. There'd be no negative ramifications from it. Turned out, as I went through this, that really wasn't the case. There were things that had to be done, just not by me. So figuring out a way to offload those things. And
sure.
I don't have all that part figured out yet, but I do have the list. I've also did the social audit. This was really interesting. So the way I did this, I created a note in Drafts, and I just started listing like all of the people I've talked to recently. Then I went through my messages, and all the people that I've texted recently, went through my contacts, listed all the people that I interact with frequently. Maybe they're in person. I don't have a record of it digitally, you know. And to the right of that, I started putting a plus if when I interacted with that person, I felt like they added life or energy to me, or a minus if I felt like they took it away from me. It didn't take very long before I realized that that system wasn't going to be robust enough to really give me a clear picture of what I wanted to capture here.
Is that because every time I talk to you, you put a minus next to my name?
Nope. You are actually, your line says Joe plus plus.
Ooh, I like that.
So,
Joe plus plus.
Yeah,
That's
there are a couple people on here who are plus plus plus. There are a significant number of people who are just a single plus. So like I have, for example, my wife and my pastor as the only 2 people on here who I consider plus 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 or 3 plus. You know, and then the other, so everything underneath that kind of is like talking about the bell curve, you know, like the Joe plus plus is kind of at the top of the available spectrum for you.
Right.
Because you're not my significant other, you're not my spiritual leader. So
that's fair.
But there are a lot of other people on this list that I interact with frequently who I would even say are friends. So this list, it was interesting. A couple takeaways from doing this exercise. This is not a reflection of the person's character. This is not a judgment on them as a person, like they are a bad person if they have a minus next to their name. What it is it is a warning sign for me that when I interact with this person, do I need to be on my guard? So for example, if I'm talking to Joe and Joe says, hey, Mike, can you help me out? I'm like, yeah, sure. No problem, Joe. Whatever it is, I'm there for you. Right. Somebody who is a minus, hey, I need you to help me with something. Maybe. What do you need?
Right.
Right. So that's setting the expectations, because right or wrong, I feel like they take more than they give. So I would need to be where I am right now on the lookout for people who are just taking from me. Not to say that I can't give to them, but another one of my action items is stop being other people's problem solvers, right? So just because there's a problem doesn't mean I'm the right person to solve it. Just because you asked me to do something doesn't mean I have the capacity to do that. So I went through this list and kind of identified, the people in my life, the interactions that I have with them. And then when I'm done interacting with them, do I feel like they've added to me or do I feel like they've taken from me? A couple people here are either plus minus or minus plus. The first one being the one that is kind of the default. But in certain contexts, for example, then maybe it changes from a plus to a minus or vice versa. Very interesting exercise, and has provided some fruit already even today when I recognized that someone is making a request of me, and right away, as soon as I see the name pop up, then I kind of know, like, okay, be ready, because they're going to want something from you. Right? Doesn't mean that I'm not going to give it, but it is going to mean that I'm going to go into the conversation with my eyes open. I'm not going to get blindsided by like, hey, I'm really in this bind and I need you to do this for me, right? Because people-pleasing Mike in that position is just like, oh yeah, sure, I'll fix it for you. And that's what I want to not do. So there's my action items.
Well done, sir. I'm glad I'm not a drain on you.
Nope. Now, if you ask me to start making action or audiograms or whatever those are called and YouTube videos, maybe, but
totally going to offload that to you. I think that's something you should be doing, Mike.
I don't think so. Sorry, guys.
Channel your inner William Ury, the power of positive no. Great fun. I've got 2 action items here. One is to schedule and follow a startup routine. The second one is to schedule and follow a communication routine. Now, I made the checklist for the startup routine. I'm about maybe 30-40% of actually following it. Definitely have it scheduled. It goes off every day. Just don't always do it. Because, it's hard, Mike, because I don't want to check my email, and email is on that list. And I'm pretty sure that's why I don't want to do it. Though I have had all kinds of issues with my email lately that I can't control. All the outages that Google had with Gmail and Google Calendar?
Nope. I was out of the country, not looking
at
those things.
Well, it's been more than just the last week. It's been like the last month. There's been some issues. And I discovered that a large number of my emails weren't coming in or going out, but it looked like they were. That makes clients angry.
Yeah.
And there's not a darn thing I can do about it. So when I discovered it, I'm now trying to use a different email address, which kind of stinks, but it is what it is. Anyway, that's the hard part about things. But anyway, email is part of that startup routine, and I need to get through it. But that's partly why I don't always go through it. So that part I have to work on a little bit more. So I need to keep that action item around for a little bit. The communication routine is in the morning part of that, but I do that a couple other times during the day. The goal of that is to help me keep up with a lot of the communication sites and such that I want to keep up with. And that's been pretty successful so far. There's been a few days lately that I haven't been able to get to it for other reasons. Like, for example, today I was running sound at a funeral at our church, which is partly why we're recording about 30 minutes later than normal. That's what I was doing. So I always have to preface that with what I was doing at the funeral, because I learned that if I just said, "Oh yeah, I was at a funeral this morning," and it doesn't even cross my mind that people think that I must have had like a relative or a friend die. Like, oh wait, no, I didn't know the person at all. I couldn't even tell you their name right now. Sorry. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but I was just running the tech for it. That was
you insensitive sound guy.
I know, right? But yeah. Anyway, that's what it is. But I didn't get to it today, of course, but most days I've been pretty good with that one. So I'll keep working on them, keep chipping away at them. But those have been pretty good so far.
Cool. On the topic of email, I want to rant for a moment here.
Ooh.
So I have a fancy new 11-inch iPad Pro that I needed for a video project that I'm working on. So
needed?
I did need it because my 10.5 has a different screen aspect ratio for a screencast course that I am building, which is completely iPad. So where am I going to get an iPad Pro? No one around me has one that I can, hey, can I just borrow your 11-inch iPad Pro?
Yeah.
So I bit the bullet and got one. I love this thing. It's awesome. And I want to use it for just about everything. The problem is that there is not a single good iOS email client out there. The best one I've found is Spark. I wrote about it over at the Sweet Setup. It's a pretty decent one. The one thing that I don't like about it, because I'm so in with MailMate on my Mac, is that the URL schemes when you send something to a task manager are all Spark URL schemes. So they're completely useless for me inside of my task manager. And that just feels not great to me. So I've been looking for alternatives, and I have a buddy who is using an app called Superhuman, which is just raised, I think, $30 million in startup money, and is supposed to be this like crazy powerful, really fast, crank through your email client for desktop and iOS. Looks really cool. You have to request access to it. Once you get access to it, guess how much it is?
$50? I don't know.
Well, it's not a one-time cost. It's a subscription.
Okay.
So guess how much the subscription is?
$1 a month? A couple dollars a month?
$30 a month.
Whoa.
Yes.
Huh.
So what I am seeing, and this is where the rant comes in, please, just somebody make a decent, pay for it once, third-party email client that allows me to send tasks to my task manager with the message : / URL scheme. That's all I want. But that does not exist. It doesn't exist anywhere. The only place I can find it is in like MailMate on the Mac, and they had to do like an Indiegogo in order to raise enough funding for that to be supported for a couple of years. I am really worried about this because I feel like we're getting to this point where you have to just use the crappy built-in tools that come with your operating system, or you're going to have to pay through the nose for something like Superhuman or a subscription to Outlook or something like that. And I don't like that. I feel like I'm okay for now because I've got MailMate on my Mac at least. But I kind of see this picture of the future where if you want a third-party email client, it's really, really, really expensive. And
you know what the answer to this is, right?
No email.
No email. At least not on mobile devices.
That's the only option. Right. Well, that's the thing with this new iPad. Like this is perfect. I want to use this for my email. I can use the Apple Pencil or even my finger, to like the swipe gestures. Like AirMail, for example, is kind of the same deal. But again, it's proprietary URL scheme. So, and AirMail has its own issues with you sending emails and you think people are getting them and they're not. But this just really paints a really bleak picture of the email future for me. Right now, it's here on iOS devices, but long term, I think even on the Mac, that we're in trouble.
Do you really need those message URLs though? I don't use them at all. Well, that's the thing.
I could work around them. I could just use like the default mail app and just flag stuff, I guess. I don't know. I feel like sometimes they're useful, but I'm gonna have to figure out something else because nobody offers it. Except for Dispatch, which hasn't been updated since, 3 years or something.
A ways back, yeah. I don't know. I don't do email on my mobile devices, so mobile device. I shouldn't make it sound like I have more than one. I'm an iPhone Mac only type weirdo.
Yeah, that's fine. That's kind of where I was going, but this iPad is very nice.
All right. Well, on that note, should we get into today's book?
Yes, let's talk about writing, which, by the way, is one of the great things about the iPad Pro is it's a phenomenal tool for writing. So I'm definitely going to be using this based on what we talked about or what we talk about in today's episode from this book. So go ahead and introduce this book.
There's your bad segue of the month. Today's book is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Tagline, some instructions on writing and life. And I was trying to think, Mike, of when I first heard about this book. I read, what's the other one? Stephen King's book on writing. I read that book way, way, way back whenever I first started writing for my blog. And I've been recently looking at getting back into writing on a bigger scale, which is why I wanted to go through this. But I'm pretty sure Stephen King mentioned this book in his. I think that's where I first heard about it. I have heard Bird by Bird brought up in a number of scenarios. I know Tim Ferriss has referenced it. Maria Popova of Brain Pickings has mentioned it in a number of scenarios. And I just felt like if I'm going to step back into writing and do that on a larger scale, that this would be an awesome book to go through. Also, we review books. We go through books. We do like SparkNote versions of books. It would be kind of helpful to kind of understand what the author goes through to create these things. So, I don't know. I felt like it was a really good fit for Bookworm.
Yes, I agree. Potentially. I feel like a lot of the stuff that she writes, well, I'll just say it this way. A lot of the advice that she gives can be applied to any context. But she is definitely approaching this through the lens of you're writing a fiction book.
Correct.
Which that part isn't a 100% match for like the Bookworm audience, because I don't think we've ever done a fiction book. Sorry, Clan of the Cave Bear, we're never going to do a fiction book.
We just got another one of those. What was the? I have to pull it up now because we just got another one of these things.
I just ignore them. Sorry. This is one of those things where, like, you got to build up the goodwill in order to earn a response, or you gotta approach it the right way. You can't just throw it out there, barf it out there, be like, "Hey, give me this." You know, like that's kind of the lens I look at this stuff through. Is like, "Hey, you got a podcast? I want to be on your podcast. Here's my I don't know, pedigree. Like, I don't care."
Yeah. Oh, I found it. I'm not going to mention it though, because then I'm promoting them. I don't want to do that. Anyway, don't send us fiction books. But this, Anne does go through, like, it is about writing a fiction book. But here, and I knew that going in. I should preface this whole conversation with that I knew she was going to be talking about writing fiction. Granted, Stephen King does as well. And his book was spot on in that regard as well. I will say that Anne Lamott's take on, kind of how should you become a writer, that, like, she has some things like how do you build dialogue between characters and how do you set the scene, and like she has some pieces like that I don't think necessarily apply to nonfiction, except here's the caveat: that is simply based on experience of the books that we have previously read. And how many times have we read books that have like a story in them? Patrick Lencioni is an excellent example. Like that concept, we always tend to gravitate towards the books that tell stories extremely well. And
true.
That concept taken from how you do that in the world of fiction and applying it to real stories is highly valuable. And
agreed.
I think that's, if you come at this from that lens of how do you tell good stories in written form, this is something you most definitely need to read for sure. That's my take.
Yeah, I completely agree that becoming good at storytelling has benefits that extend far beyond writing a good fiction book. So I'm glad you called that out. Yeah, how do you want to do this? So it's broken down into 5 different sections. Half of the book is in the first section.
Yes.
Well, let's just go through the sections here, and then maybe we'll jump into part 1, and I'll let you kick it off wherever you want to start. So part 1 is writing. Part 2 is the writing frame of mind. Part 3 is help along the way. Part 4, publication and other reasons to write. Part 5, the last class. All right, so let's talk about the first part here. Part 1, writing.
Now, I'm going to read off the chapters that are in here, because there are... was it 15, 14, something like that. I'm going to read these off because I think just seeing the titles can kick a few things off here. And I'm going to, yeah, and I'll do this each time, but I'm going to censor a couple times here because Anne has a mouth on her, and I'm sure
she and Mark Manson would be buddies.
Yeah, along with Amanda Palmer, like they'd get along great. So anyway, here you go. Getting started. Short assignments, censored, terrible first drafts, perfectionism, school lunches, Polaroids, character, plot, dialogue, set design, false starts, plot treatment. How do you know when you're done? And this whole part is specifically geared towards how do you build a story, or how do you start the process of coming up with what your story will be. And if I had to summarize this entire section, I think it would just be a matter of sit your butt in the chair and let your thoughts run wild and put it on paper. Like, if I had to just summarize the whole thing, I think that's what it would be. Now, granted, there's a lot of extras and such that go with that, but I think that's the overarching theme. And, you know, the big one being like how you come up with ideas, and you know, you're not going to write it perfect the first time. Like there's a lot of those little details I think we could get into, but again, the overarching here is just let your imagination run wild, but put it down on paper. Is that a fair take on that, Mike?
Yeah. Well, so that is fair, and I think it extends even beyond this first section.
Sure.
Really, the big takeaway after reading this whole book is show up and do the work. Done.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you want to write, show up and write. That's really the thing here. Right. And there's lots of little tactics that she explains on like how to do specific things in terms of character development, stuff like that. But yeah, like the big thing here is that you just need to do it consistently and at the beginning as you are writing. But I think this even extends beyond the writing process. Like you could apply this model to just about anything. She's obviously applying it specifically to writing a fiction book. But the first 3 pages, she says on page 9, those are going to be garbage. You're going to throw those out. But you needed to write those so that you could get to the 4th page, which has got that one long paragraph, which is really what you had in mind when you started, only you didn't know that. You couldn't get to it until you slogged through the 3 pages before that. Really, another way to state that would be that the result is, like, whatever you create, you're not going to be 100% happy with everything that you create. But that's okay, because really the value is in the process, not in the work that you create. So don't view it as wasted time for writing those first 3 pages. Those were necessary in order to get to the 4th page. And I think for a lot of people, they don't necessarily get that connection, which is also kind of sobering if you think that you're going to sit down and, okay, I'm going to crank out my bestseller in a couple of months. Probably not going to happen, because the majority of what you're going to write is going to be garbage and you're going to have to throw it out. And she tells some stories as she goes through this of how that actually happened to her.
Right. And she does go into, and I think this makes perfect sense. For example, a trend that I've been noticing is, and this is again a reason that I want to get back into writing, and I have a lot more reasons. I'm not sure I'm going to get into all of them today, but there are a lot of people starting to write much longer articles. Brett McKay over at Art of Manliness has been doing this for a long time. He writes these really, really long articles, and they do extremely well. Mark Manson, who I think you just mentioned, like he wrote an article, I think it was yesterday, about how we need to be writing long form articles again. It seems like people are getting back into reading longer texts as opposed to these short 500 word articles. And like, for example, the Mark Manson article, the math, they've got one of those calculations that tells you how long it would take to read it. The time on it was 26 minutes. Like, that's a pretty long article.
Yeah.
Like bordering on, long form essay. And when you get to writing things at that length, it gets difficult to sit down and write it all in one time, briefly go over it, and then release it. Like, you and I have written blog posts in the past. They're 500-600 words. You can sit down, crank them out in one sitting, turn around, edit it in 10-15 minutes, and then you can release it. But I think that's probably not what she would want you to do, because you're not going to have the in-depth, like, you're just trying to get something out the door. Like, you're probably not putting your heart and soul into it. You're just trying to get text released.
Well, that was the question in the back of my mind as I went through this, because she's obviously talking about this through the lens of getting a book published, which, by the way, it's worth calling out in the first section, getting started. She has this phrase, which I really like. She said, most people kind of want to write, but they really want to be published.
Yeah.
I think that's totally true. When really you have to fall in love with the process, and you have to want to write because it's just got to come out of you. That's the point that you have to get to if you're really going to be consistent with it and it's really going to work for you. But the other question in the back of my head was, how does this apply to blogging? So I'm glad that you called that out, and like, that's your perspective as you're going through this, is that's kind of what you want to do. It sounds like is you want to write more for the web, which isn't going to be as refined, but still there's a lot of value in understanding the process, sitting down and doing it every day, and implementing some of the other tactics that she talks about in here. I can totally see where that has a benefit to somebody who wants to blog consistently too.
Right. And not just these quick 1,000-word things or 500-word things. Like, I have a lot of thoughts that I feel like I want to share, and that's again why I wanted to go through this. Just to kind of refresh my brain in the tactics and methods of writing long form. Anyway, cool. There's that. But that's.
I also have to call out because we haven't really had a chance to talk or record. Really, I think we recorded since I got back from Craft and Commerce, but we really didn't talk about it a whole lot. I actually saw Mark Manson speak, and I think I dislike him as much in person as I do in the bookstore.
All right.
It was interesting because
at least
he's
you're
kind
consistent.
he's kind of like the big keynote speaker, right? And they scheduled it so that the very end of the second day, so right before the conference ends, there's an afternoon session where he speaks, and then this blind girl who ended up being Miss Teen Canada speaks. And his whole message was basically, screw hope. I'm just going to sit around in my boxers and play Zelda all day. And then they get this blind girl that comes up there, totally inspirational. And she's like, hope is the thing that got me through. Like, total opposite ends of the spectrum. Yeah. And that kind of came across as like, well, he's super successful, right? So he's doing something right. He's speaking to somebody. But you kind of get the message from him is like, everything's kind of pointless. And then she gets up and like, there's not a dry eye in the audience. And it's, I don't know, it could not be more juxtaposed in terms of the message. And it happened to be him and then her, and then the conference is over.
Yeah. Wow.
So very interesting.
For sure. But anyway, I know that like Anne has, the first draft thing is important because she continually calls out, even throughout the book, like, you have to get it done, and you're going to have to come back and, to use the cliche term, kill your darlings. Like, you have to come back and edit ruthlessly. And that is a piece that she's calling out here, is like, just get it on the paper. Now, other parts of this first section, involve like, how do you develop characters? How do you develop a plot, a dialogue, building the scene, building out what is known as a plot treatment. Like, she does go into each of those. Those are interesting, but I don't think those translate as cleanly as some of the other sections on, whenever you're getting into like nonfiction writing or telling stories about real things.
Right.
They don't always translate real well, but I think it's still interesting to learn about.
Yeah, one section that I liked was the section on perfectionism, because she introduces the idea, because we all want to be organized and tidy, right? Is it Marie Kondo? It's like what's the name of that book? It's sold like a gazillion copies. You see it everywhere. The life-changing magic of tidying up, or something like that.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do, yes.
Okay. So there's that whole kind of current in, I guess, maybe the productivity space, but maybe it's wider than that, of this organization and a place for everything in its place, right? And then in the section on perfectionism, she talks about how tidiness suggests that something is as good as it's going to get, whereas clutter allows you to discover new treasures under all your piles. I thought this was an interesting idea. I'm not sure I agree with that analogy 100%, but I think there is something to the fact that if everything is just completely tidy all the time, you never make a mess, that is maybe as good as things are going to get, and it's all downhill from there. So, the big takeaway for me from reading this section is kind of like, everything doesn't have to be perfect, basically. And that messes are part of the process. And if something breaks, just don't freak out about it. Just figure it out, fix it, move on. And it's all adding up to the net result of the finished product, whatever that happens to be. Fiction,
right.
Book, blog post, whatever.
The thing. Yeah. Anything else you want to go through here?
I like the section on Polaroids. So I should call out, like, all of these chapters, there's basically a story that goes along with it, and then a main point. I did not like having just one little node off of the chapter from my MindNode file. So I tried to get at least two every time, which is difficult sometimes. But this one only has a couple. But one of the big idea here is that, like a Polaroid picture, you take it, then you flap it for a while, and then the picture starts to materialize. And as the picture comes in, you start to see more of the detail. And you notice little things that you didn't see at first. Kind of another idea associated with that is, like, you never know what it's really going to look like until it's finished developing. When I was on my mission trip, somebody had actually brought a Polaroid camera, and it was a really cheap thing. And they're like, "Oh, this is so cool." And, they take the picture and they're flapping it, and then they see it and they're like, "Oh, this doesn't look good at all." They were arguing about, like, well, maybe you should position the people over here because some of them are in the sun, some of them are not. It's not going to look very good. I'm just like, doesn't matter. Just take the picture,
Yeah.
And the Polaroid comes out and you're like, look, you can't even tell who's in the sun and who's not. But I thought that was kind of interesting because, I was reading this on the plane on the way down there, and then they've got the Polaroid camera, and I recognize that, like, as they're waving, like, oh, look, you can see that thing behind me now. And then a little bit later, you can see additional details. And I think that's kind of a cool analogy for the creative process, whatever you happen to be creating. I think kind of Bookworm, or even a podcast, kind of falls into this category too. If you were to go back to episode 1 and listen to it and interview Joe and Mike about what is this thing going to be, we probably would not have accurately described the place it is right now, where we've got a forum associated with it.
Right.
We've got a premium membership. There's people listening live. Like, there's no way we would have known those details when we started this thing. And that's okay. You don't need to know all those details when you're just starting. You just got to know the next step.
We even had, and I know we'd had it completely wrong because we had a different intent for it when we started too. Like, we were expecting people to listen in and then read along with us the whole time, and that is far from what we hear. Like,
it turns out most of you just listen because you don't want to read the books.
Yeah. So we cover it for you. We are the
which is
Spark
fine. Totally fine. I don't want to knock that at all, but I'm glad you called that out, because it is a very good example of how, like, we thought it was going to serve this role. Somebody else recognized, like, no, actually the benefit I get from it is this.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll
Right.
try to do more of that.
And that's exactly, I mean, if you go back and look at the way that things change, it's totally a creative process like what Anne Lamott's talking about here, because the way that we built our outlines to begin with, like from the talking points section, like we originally just put down the high points that we wanted to discuss.
Yep.
And it was kind of just like, let's discuss the book and what we got out of it, which we still do. But if you notice, we changed our outline to follow the outline of the book, and we discuss each section of the book instead of just hitting the high points we want to cover. So,
which is, by the way, why we will never cover a fiction book. There is no value in us providing you a synopsis of The Lord of the Rings.
Right.
You already know the story. The joy is in the journey if you're going to sit down and read all that and getting all the details. For the nonfiction books, yeah, you just want to get the main ideas and you want to apply a couple things to your life. So that's what Bookworm is. So sorry to everybody who doesn't like that, but that's the nature of the beast.
On that note, sign up for membership. Part 2.
So you don't have to read all the books, and you can look at my MindNode files instead.
Then you can go through then you don't even have to listen to it. You can just read Mike's MindNode file.
Yep. And search them. They're OCR'd.
Part 2, the writing frame of mind. Here are the chapters inside of this part. Looking around, the moral point of view, broccoli, radio station KFKD. I'll let you associate the word there. And then jealousy. And summarizing this basically is saying sometimes writing sucks. Get over it. Like that's
Yep.
That's pretty much what I got out of that one. I will say the stories and the point of view are fascinating coming from her. And I can definitely see a lot of the issues, like just historically when I've been writing, and even recently when I've been writing, seeing some of these things come up in my own mind. Like I have definitely seen those. So it was refreshing to see, oh, she deals with this too. Like I'm okay.
Yep.
Not by myself.
Yeah. So a couple takeaways from this section. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my goodness, they are like 45 minutes in and they're just through section 1, these are going to go a lot faster. Like I said, part 1 is half the book. But there's a couple things that stood out to me here. The first one is the first chapter, looking around. On page 97, she says, writing is about learning to pay attention and to communicate what's going on. This is something I want to do a better job of. And this is one of the things, actually the only thing that I wrote down as an action item. I think I mentioned it on this podcast before, but I was working with a speech coach who was the runner-up for the, was it the World Championship of Public Speaking, the big Toastmasters competition in like 2016. And he was having me build out a story file, which I kind of walked away from for a while. The idea behind the story file is that you capture all of these things into a journal or some digital place, analog, I guess you could do too. But the idea is that you have these collections of stories with all of these bullet points, all of these details, and then whenever you need one of those stories, you can select it and you can tell either like the long version, you can condense it, whatever. But like these are kind of always in your back pocket, which is a really cool idea, especially for somebody who wants to get into speaking, because those stories, as we are recognizing from this book, those are the things that really resonate with your listeners. So unless you are talking to people who have heard it a million times before, that can be really a tool that you can use to really build engagement with your audience, whether it's a couple people, a couple hundred people, a couple thousand people, whatever. So learning to pay attention to communicate what's going on, that's directly tied for me, I think, to this story file. Because if I take the time to recognize what's going on around me and I capture these things into my story file, and then I can always flesh them out later. But just capturing these things that are happening into that story file in the first place, that's the thing that I want to take away from this, because I feel like there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens all the time that I'm just so busy that I don't even recognize that it's happening, or I don't appreciate that it's happening. So, I mean, this is really illustrated for me in this mission trip going down to Costa Rica, because culture is so different. People there are so different. There's 1,000 different stories that I could add to my story file from my time down there. But if I don't intentionally put them in there, then they're just going to get lost. And if you come and talk to me at Macstock and say, hey, tell me about your mission trip to Costa Rica, if I never documented those things, I might have that deer in the headlights look like, trying to recreate the memories from scratch. Like the story file makes it so you don't have to do that sort of thing. And I feel like if you have that sort of thing, then it makes whatever you want, whenever you sit down to write, like you've got those as kind of like starters for whatever you would write about. That's a big idea from the first section we didn't spend a whole lot of time on, but like really when you write, even for fiction, you want to tell the truth. You want to tell it in an interesting way, but you want to talk about the things that are authentic. And so if you talk about things that have happened to you, that's kind of an easy way to do that.
Right. Use your own experience and your own thoughts to get there.
Yep.
So yeah, the writing frame of mind, a big piece of it is pay attention to what's going on around you and, be okay with knowing that things are going to go bad sometimes. If you fall into a rut, you don't know what to write, you feel like you're a terrible writer, like you still got to write. You still have to get it out. That's kind of my takeaway.
The other thing that kind of smacked me in the face was the moral point of view. So I just launched a product called Faith-Based Productivity, right? And I feel like I unintentionally kind of fell into this.
Okay.
What she says in here is a moral position is not a message. And I feel like I do have a message with the product, so don't get me wrong there. But I also, this was a good reminder that like just because I have a unique take or a unique position and a unique perspective on this idea of faith-based productivity doesn't mean that anybody else is going to care. The rest of it still needs to be good.
Right.
So you don't inherit a platform because of your moral stance on something. And I feel like maybe a lot of people from our religious perspective think that they have some sort of moral high ground because of their religious belief system. And that's not really the case. We're all on the same level playing field, and you got to earn the right for people to listen to you.
Agreed. All right, part 3. Help along the way. I think you were kind of getting into this just now. The chapters within this part, index cards, maybe one of my favorites, calling around, writing groups, someone to read your drafts, letters, writer's block. My sense is that this is the practical section, like the I shouldn't say practical, the tactical side of the book. Index cards, like what you were talking about, Mike, building out, like writing down stories or writing out exchanges, dialogue, points that you want to put into your writing, whether it's the writing you're working on right now or one for the future. So pay attention to what's going on around you and write things down. That was my takeaway from that.
And actually, this is where my action item is listed in the MindNode file, but it really started in that looking around section.
Sure.
Because before you can capture it, you need to notice it.
Right, for sure. The next chapter in that section was, my book just closed, Calling Around. This one, it kind of struck me as a throwback to digital minimalism to some degree. Obviously, she wrote this way before digital minimalism and Cal Newport had the idea for it. But the premise is talk to other people, ask people for advice whenever you have a technical thing you're trying to figure out, looking for expertise in a certain area, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to other people about your idea and getting the details around it. That was my sense of it, and I think it makes perfect sense. Like, if you're supposed to be paying attention and looking around and writing things down about the exchanges, it would make perfect sense to create those exchanges so that you have something to write down.
Yeah. When I was going through that section here, so basically everything except the first chapter in this section, index cards, and the last section, writer's block, all kind of has to do with getting help from other people. Even the letters section, I think, kind of invokes that, although it doesn't assume that you have somebody on call who can help you out with stuff. And I kind of thought that you could bundle all of this together under a chapter called Masterminds.
Sure.
And I know masterminds is not a super common idea. I actually have a blog post on my site that I wrote because we were talking about it a lot on the Focus podcast, and people were like, well, how do I do this? And so I've been a part of one locally for a while, and I kind of wrote up a process for people to follow if they want something like that. But I'll link to that in the show notes for this. But the basic idea here is that like you need a group of people really who are going to hold you accountable for what you say you're going to do, and who are going to see your blind spots, who are going to see the things that you don't see, who are going to tell you the truth but not be a jerk, or at least like you're not going to receive it hurtfully because you've given them the platform to speak into your life. And you obviously don't want to open yourself up like that to just anybody. And so I think the way she presents it is fine. Like everything that she says here is true, but I feel like it's more complicated than it needs to be when you're talking about, okay, who are the people, and I'm going to identify them, who I can call around and get answers from. Different group of people, who are the ones that I want to invite into my writing group, who are going to give me feedback, who are going to speak the truth, but gently, she puts it, is how she puts it. And then who is the person that I'm going to allow to read my drafts and give feedback on what works, what doesn't. Like those could all be the same people in a mastermind group. If you get everybody in that group with the same perspective of we want to write and we want to help each other produce better writing, then you can kind of check all of these boxes at once, I think.
Yeah. Makes sense. A couple pieces here we didn't cover there. The letters piece and writer's block. Writer's block, she had an interesting point here. Like block implies that you're stopped and you're not able to proceed forward. And she argues that writer's block is actually writer's emptiness. I don't think she coined that term,
yes,
but I made it up. But you're just empty. You don't have something to write about. Like you haven't had that spark. Thus, calling your friends. Starting to write, the chapter before that, writing letters, which is where my action item comes in. I have for a long time wanted to write letters to my kids for the future. And this is something that she talks about specifically in there. And something about the way she posed it finally motivated me to the point where I actually want to proceed with this. So I did start doing this morning. So I'm planning to continue to write letters to my kids, which I think should be a fascinating view into my own brain, I think.
Nice.
Maybe a slightly terrifying view into my own brain, but we'll see.
Yeah, and again, the idea behind the letters section is that you're really stuck and you want to look through, she calls it like a 1-inch frame. So you don't want to try and get the whole picture. You just want to focus on this one little detail. And by writing a letter, you're able to kickstart that process. And pretty soon you've got pages and pages of stuff that you can use for something else. And the letter emerges kind of like a Polaroid picture, right?
Right.
But you could get the same thing from a mastermind group. I think even the writer's block, like she says, don't think of it as a block. Think of it as looking at a problem from the wrong angle. So when you are stuck, when you need somebody to help you get going, that's really the end result of what we're trying to get through in all of these different things as she's breaking down this different section is like, when you are not moving, how do you get moving again? I think that idea is very key. Of when you are stuck, when you have encountered a block, whatever it looks like, whether you define it as writer's block or not, it is simply you are facing an obstacle or a problem and you're looking at it from the wrong angle. Well, if you have other people who can look at it from different angles, it's a lot easier to say, oh yeah, you're right. Like that is the way that I should be looking at this, and I should try that other thing. When all you see is the thing in front of you, then though it can be really intimidating.
Yes. Part 4, publication and other reasons to write. There are 4 chapters within this part. The first one, writing a present. So writing in order to give it to someone else. That's kind of what the letters piece is. Maybe, the letters chapter doesn't necessarily refer to giving that to someone, but in this section it is. Like you're writing something that could be then a gift to someone else. The second one, finding your voice. I'm going to come back to that one because I actually had an exception to take with that one. Giving, giving things to other people, of time and efforts. And then publication, because everyone always asks her how to be publicized. Like,
Yep.
how do I get this out into the world? Like, that's the main reason people want to write. It's like, I really like having written, but I don't like writing, like that concept.
Yep.
But
exactly.
so she does go through, like, it's difficult. It's not all it's cracked out to be, but it's really rewarding if you do it. Like, that was kind of the take. So anyway, coming back to finding your voice, I felt like I was misled by that one, which I think this was the first time I really felt this way when reading this particular book, because my sense from reading that chapter was she would give you some tips on how to find your voice, and maybe she did, I just missed it. But I rather got, don't take someone else's voice. Like, that was kind of my overarching view of that particular chapter. Like, come on, like, I was looking for you to, like, say, go do this, 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 and this, and then it will help you develop your voice. Really, what she's saying is just write a lot and don't steal other people's voice. Like, be real to yourself. Okay.
And I feel like the tactics that she does give you in terms of finding your own voice are completely negative and pessimistic. Like, the things that I wrote down are shine light on the monster within and talk about the cold things below the surface. Like, that's really what she's saying in this chapter, other than don't copy this one lady. I didn't look up that person, but she mentions an author specifically where whenever she comes out with a new book, she hates it because she knows that 2/3 of her class is going to try to copy it.
Right.
And I get that. I mean, all you have to do is walk through an airport bookstore and see all of the censored book titles to to see evidence of that. Everybody's trying to copy Mark Manson because he's edgy, and it doesn't work for everybody else. And I'd argue it doesn't even work for me anyways with Mark Manson. So we will probably never cover a Mark Manson book. You can go ahead and vote for that one if you want, but I may use my veto power on that one. Anyways, like, it's really, you don't feel great about reading this chapter. You feel kind of hopeless. Like, okay, so I'm gonna have to just talk about all the bad stuff that's going on in my life, or otherwise I'm probably copying somebody else. And I don't think that's completely true. I think that you can definitely talk in your own voice, and you want to share the difficult things, but it doesn't all have to be the difficulties. Like, if everything is hopeless, I don't know. I don't want to read that book.
Yeah.
Even if everything is hopeless, which, by the way, it's not. So, so I don't know. I mean, a lot of the books, if you look back at, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, the ones that have sold like the 20 million copies, the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, how to win friends and influence people. Like, they promise a solution to a problem that people have, and it's successful because it resonates with people and they think, oh, I can do that. So I think finding your voice from a nonfiction perspective anyways, and maybe this is one of those things that just doesn't translate well from speaking to fiction writers to speaking to nonfiction writers, but no one wants to hear about all your troubles unless you made it through and you've got some takeaways for people. It's kind of my perspective.
Okay. No, I don't think it's wrong. I just think there's... I came at this one kind of colored, I think, to some degree, because I know that I have done a lot of reading, just general research and such, on some of the ways to find your writing voice. Generally, you hear people just say write a lot, and write short form and medium form until you can figure out what your voice is, and then go on to long form. Like, I've heard that, and I was kind of curious as to what Anne Lamott's take on that was, but she's definitely a tried and true artist and a creative, and has, I don't want to say has to, but likes to color things with a different perspective. And she's very funny in that, but it's sometimes hard to translate into, now what do I do with that? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, figure out your monsters, great. What do I do to do that? that was some of my struggle. But again, it's Anne Lamott, and I think she's a great writer. I just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I guess, my follow up to that would be, okay, so I've shown light on the monsters within. How does that help me with the writing that I do?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, it makes sense on one level. Like, you want to talk about the things that you've gone through and how you've overcome them, but it doesn't make sense for someone who does writing like I do to just completely dwell on those things forever. That's not the goal of the writing that I'm doing. I'm not trying to evoke an emotion and get you to feel sorry for me. I'm trying to help other people, which kind of gets into the giving section,
Right.
But also, I agree, there's not a whole lot of specific details on how to do that. So I'm kind of curious, like, have I found my writing voice? I have no idea. Maybe you could tell me, having read some of my stuff. Like,
I don't think you have.
Okay.
That's just my perspective.
That could 100% be true. So then the next question, being the perfectionist that I am, then it's like, it's a good thing I didn't know that, or I never would have self-published my book. I never would have written anything, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just faking it. But the truth is, we're all faking it to some degree. So I don't know. Maybe it's not necessary that you find your voice before you start writing. Maybe it's a process, and as soon as you start, you find your voice. But you continue to refine that voice over the years that you are writing and producing and creating. Because I think not just like the writing of the book or the creation of a course, but even podcasting like this, how I talk about things on Bookworm in episode 71 is very different than how I talked about things in episode 1. So maybe that's part of the journey of finding my voice. But I agree that, like, I have no idea what the process is in order to do that.
I think you have to write a lot of short form articles and such before you can try out like minor points in voice. And then you have to step into some medium and longer form and then expand on it. And you kind of have to do that a couple times, I feel, before you get to where you really have it locked in. There are exceptions to that rule, like Maria Popova of Brain Pickings. I mentioned her earlier. Like, she has a very specific voice in her writing, and she spends quite a bit of time on her articles for Brain Pickings. But she's been doing that for a very long time, and that's kind of how she's developed that. I think if you want to do it quicker, you kind of have to float between short, medium, and long form writing and be very specific about trying to figure out how you want to write and be true to yourself. But
sure,
I don't think that's going to just happen in the span of a couple months. Like, writing every day, doing it for a couple months, you maybe have a hint of what your voice is. Like, I think that takes quite a bit of time to really get it locked in. Just my perspective.
I agree with that. I also want to call out, though, and encourage people that if you don't think you found it yet, like, don't let that keep you from starting either.
No, if anything, let that be encouragement to keep trying.
If I had known what I didn't know, maybe I wouldn't have done anything that I did. But I don't know. I think there's value in it. I get messages from people all the time who are like, I really appreciate the fact that you created this thing or wrote that thing or this podcast. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to teach what you do know, and as you progress, you recognize that you weren't everything that you thought you were. You don't know as much as you thought you did, but That's not necessarily a bad thing either. Just keep going forward. Don't necessarily look back and judge the past.
Now, I feel kind of bad because I don't think we've called this out quite yet, but this book is written as a print form of a creative writing class that Anne Lamott teaches.
Yes.
And I feel like we've kind of alluded to that a few times, but we haven't pointed it out specifically. So this book was written as a print form of her class.
Yep.
And I say that because the last part here is called The Last Class. And during the last session of her teaching to her students, she feels like she's given quite a bit to them, but she has like just a couple more things she wants to point out. And this is a pretty, I mean, a lot of these chapters are pretty quick, but there's a piece in the second paragraph right at the beginning of it in this chapter that I just want to read this real quick because I feel like this is a culmination of so much that she has pointed out in the rest of the book. All right. So here we go. So becoming a writer is about becoming conscious. When you're conscious and writing from a place of insight and simplicity and real caring about the truth, you have the ability to throw on the lights for your reader. And to me, that's really important because so much of what she's talked about is paying attention to what's going on, being true to yourself, be authentic, show up and do the work, and share it with the world in some form or another. But a lot of that comes back to being aware of what's happening and then figuring out how to articulate that to other people. So I did really appreciate this particular quote and was definitely one I had highlighted here.
Yeah, becoming conscious is just the note that I had, but yeah, it's a powerful idea for sure. I also want to, I would say, or to reframe maybe this last section. I feel like this was restating a lot of the stuff that was in the book, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And when you understand it as a class context, like you mentioned, then you understand there's a lot more value in doing it this way. In a book form, it's kind of weird because you're reading a lot of the same things again, but I could totally see this being valuable in a in-person setting where you want to make sure this really sticks before you never see these people again.
Right, right.
So
some of that
cool.
Could be, you and I go through books pretty quick.
Yep.
Sometimes I feel like we get to the last chapter and authors like to summarize because they feel like it's taken people a long time to get there. I sometimes wonder about that. It's like we read this, like Michael Hyatt did it to some degree in summarizing at the end of his book, but I read it in 2 days, so that meant that I was reading the summary when I felt like I had just finished reading the stuff.
Sure.
Like, wait, hold up. I wonder if, with books like this, authors feel the need to summarize as a way of closure.
Yeah.
But because we're going through it so quick, it doesn't feel like that was necessary. I don't know. That's speculation. I haven't thought that through.
That could be. If you go through it a lot slower than we do, then there probably is value in reviewing everything. Also, the way that I take notes kind of diminishes the value of saying these things again. But again, that's just me being weird with my big mind node files.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think in a classroom context, though, it makes perfect sense. So that's kind of the way I viewed this last chapter and didn't hold it against her.
Yeah, fair enough.
There is a cool section in here about, or an analogy. She makes the point basically that you can either set a brick as a laborer or an artist. And this is a really cool idea, and it reminds me of this story that I know I heard in one of the other books that we've covered. I don't know if we've talked about it, but like one of my favorite stories, it's probably not even like a true story, but it's kind of one of those ones that, to illustrate a point, is about the 3 bricklayers. Have you heard this one before?
I'm vaguely placing it, but I could not tell it to you right now.
Okay, well, it's basically what she's saying. And the story goes something like there's these 3 guys who are all working on this masonry wall, and there's this tourist who walks up to the first guy and he says, "What are you doing?" He's like, "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm laying bricks." And then he walks up to the second guy and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm building a wall." And he walks up to the third guy and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I am building a great cathedral." And it's the perspective that they have towards the work that they're doing that's kind of the difference. Whereas the first guy is just looking at the task that he's doing right now. He doesn't have a very big vision. He doesn't see how it fits into the larger picture. And kind of the moral of the story is that because he can't see that, like there's no meaning behind anything that he's doing. The second guy who's building the wall, he understands a little bit of how this is tying together, but still like doesn't have the motivation behind like the big picture. This is what it's going to look like when we're done. And the last guy who's building the cathedral, he's got the vision. So he's able to bring everything that he has towards this thing because it really has meaning to him. And I feel like that's what she's getting at here when she says you can either set a brick as a laborer or as an artist. If you're setting a brick as a laborer, I just got to crank out some words. that's a lot different than I get to craft this story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all in your mindset.
Yep. Yep. And I feel like that is one of the most important things you can do, is to cross that bridge from viewing it as it's just a task to viewing it as this work has meaning. Whether it is a part of your big life theme, vision for your life, whatever, or not, like I think that's kind of a thing that has to be there in order for this to stick. If all you see is the task in front of you, for a while you can show up every day and you can check the box and you can say, whew, I wrote my 1,000 words this morning. But after a while, that's not going to be enough to carry you through. You're gonna encounter that morning when you didn't sleep well and you just don't have any energy, and at that point you got to dig a little bit deeper. And if you don't have a reservoir to draw from of meaning behind the work that you're doing, then that's the point where you're going to give up.
Right. I think that's a good place to end this, unless you have more you want to cover.
No, I will mention the title is interesting, and that comes from a story that she tells way back in the first section, which we should call out, I feel, because she had a brother who was procrastinating on like a science project or something, and it was due the next day, and he had to classify like all these different types of birds, right? So he's got his head down on the table, totally dejected, can't figure out how he's going to get all of this done by tomorrow. And her father's advice to her brother was bird by bird, buddy, just take it bird by bird.
It's a good story. It's even on the back of the book. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Action items. I have one. You have one. I might have two. I don't know. I'm going to write letters to my kids. They might be long. And I'm hoping to write more for all of you, but I'm not ready to release any of that yet. I have been writing for it, though. But
sweet.
That's where I land on action items. I'm probably just going to put the letters on the club. But
is the Zettelkasten helping with that?
Somewhat, yeah. That's kind of an odd... It's been kind of an odd timing of these things. Like, yes, the Zettelkasten, for those who didn't catch it, How to Take Smart Notes, that book. So with the Zettelkasten, like, that's been like helping me develop the habit of writing every morning. And then that has kind of grown into, I write in my Zettelkasten, but then I turn and write on articles and potentially even an email newsletter as well. So I've been working on those to some degree, but it's kind of grown out of that, yes.
Gotcha. All right. Is that it for your action items then? Just
I better
the letters for
there.
now? Okay. My action item is to build out my story file inside of Day One specifically. Day One is an absolutely incredible application, which I should call out. The Sweet Setup has an updated Day One course, which I did the screencast for. So if you want to learn how to use it, you should go check it out. I saw you tweet about that too, so thanks.
Yeah, I'm not a Day One user, but I know it's a good deal.
Yeah, Day One's awesome. I have been a premium subscriber for a while. It's one of those subscription apps. I think it's like $25 a year, and I just happily pay it. Even though I was invited to the beta and I can get free access to it if I want to, I just continue to pay for it because I want to support the development of it, and it's just a phenomenal application.
Yeah.
So I've got a journal in there specifically for stories, and I am going to start building that stuff out more. That's my action item from this one.
Nice. Style and rating. Anne Lamott is very, very easy to read. And this book is chock full of stories, as you would expect. And I really enjoyed going through this, Mike. I know I had a couple qualms here and there. Her use of language isn't overwhelming to me. I felt like Amanda Palmer was right on the limit for me. I'm sure it was a bit much for you. I'm pretty sure. I won't put words in your mouth, though.
Oh, this isn't even close to Amanda Palmer.
That's fair. That's fair. Those two should hang out, though. I really enjoyed this and would recommend it. If you have any hint of wanting to write or understand writing, this one and Stephen King's On Writing book, like those two are awesome. I would pick up this one first, though. That's my take on it. For a rating, it's kind of a different book than what we normally cover. I feel like we kind of even
Yeah.
alluded to, like, we weren't real sure how to cover this. I'm going to put it at a 4.5. I don't think it's 5 territory, but 4 doesn't seem to do it justice. Like, this is a really well-known book, and does a phenomenal job of writing, and has thoroughly motivated me to get into some things I've wanted to do for a long time, and has given me some of the tools to do so. That said, I'm going to put it at a 4.5. Really enjoyed the book. I recommend you read it.
All right. I feel like I need to defend myself just briefly because, I went to Craft and Commerce, heard Mark Manson speak. They even had like a disclaimer before his talk. Like, if you're offended by this stuff, you should probably leave the room. Like, I stayed and listened to it. It is fine. It doesn't bother me. I just feel like there are other ways to communicate what you want to say. And I feel like with her stuff specifically, there was definitely other ways to say some of the things that she wanted to say. With Amanda Palmer, it just felt like, to me anyways, the vocabulary wasn't there to use other words.
Yeah.
That's probably totally unfair to Amanda Palmer. I recognize that. But that's the impression that I got from going through it. Sort of the impression that I got going through this. Again, not nearly the same level. But the whole section on like the voices in your head, like that's a great idea there. But she's totally doing it for shock value. And I don't know. I feel like that detracts from what she is sharing there. That being said, there's a lot of good stuff in this book. Like you said, national bestseller. I'm not even sure how many millions of copies this is sold. I think there's a lot of great stuff in here. I think there's more great stuff in here for fiction writers than there are for anybody else who's not writing fiction. Like I said, I felt like there's a lot of stuff that translated over to blogging, but there wasn't a real clear connection there for me until we started talking through stuff. So I'm kind of on the fence of where to rate this. I think I'm going to put it at 3.5 because I think there are some great ideas in here. I don't think there was anything super revolutionary. I mentioned at the beginning, kind of half jokingly, that you could summarize the entire book in just show up and write. I think that's kind of true. And I also think that for someone who wants to write a fiction book, this is just absolute gold. I feel like if you're going to apply this to anything else, you got to do some translation. Some of it is easy, some of it not so much. And so I'm rating it from that perspective. But I do definitely think it is a good book. Did feel weird reading this without a filter or censor on the way to a missions trip from my church. Felt a little bit dirty getting off the plane. But it's a good book.
All right. We can put it on the shelf then. What's next, Mike?
Next is a Gap book that I read and a bunch of you voted for called Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky. This is the anti-free to focus, so this will be interesting as a follow-up to our conversation from episode 70.
Yeah.
Lots of little tactics, instead of just like a big system.
Yeah. I don't know. I part of it's kind of crazy. We're over 70 books at this point.
Yeah.
That's kind of nuts to me. Anyway, so after Make Time, one that I have never read, I've actually never even held this in my hand, and I'm somewhat embarrassed, kind of proud of that at the same time. The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. This is up there on the votes. I feel like we need to cover this, Mike. I feel like it's one of those that we just must cover.
Yep.
I have a love-hate relationship with Tim Ferriss.
Me too.
So I'm not sure how this is going to go. Sometimes I think he has some phenomenal things he does, and sometimes I'm like, what are you thinking? You just don't. Anyway, I think it'll be a good book. It'll be a good one to talk about for sure.
I feel like this one is going to have some pretty good rants in it. So if you want the complete, raw, uncensored, rant-worthy experience, you definitely want to attend the live recording of this one.
Oh, that's true.
Because I typically, when I edit them, I'm like, I came across a little too strong there, and I'll edit it pretty heavily. But that's definitely going to happen with this book.
Yep, I could see that. Got a Gap book this time?
I do. My Gap book is Lynchpin by Seth Godin, kind of inspired by your Gap book. Was it last time you had
Yeah.
Had a Gap book by Seth Godin. I haven't read anything by Seth in quite a while, but he's a phenomenal writer. And Linchpin is a book that I actually got when I was at Entre Leadership. They gave books to everybody who attended for all of the people who spoke who had books. So I ended up carrying home like 8 books inside of my bag that I didn't have when I got there.
Yeah.
This is one of those books, and I hear from a lot of people this is kind of a really good one. So
yeah. I'm in the process of starting one at the moment. So I guess I'm getting ready to go on a trip as well. My wife and I are going on a trip to North Carolina to celebrate our 10th anniversary. And I needed to pick up a book. We were talking about this right before we jumped on. So I picked one up, and I've wanted to read this one for a while. I've had it in my hands for quite some time. But Essential Manners for Men, What to Do, When to Do It, and Why. This is by Peter Post of the Emily Post Institute. And I picked this up at some random bookstore for $1.99. I feel like I need to go through this because I'm not always the greatest with manners. That's my sense.
Nice.
So reading it while I'm on vacation with my wife would probably be a little late, but you know.
You'll what's that term? Speed of implementation. So you can be reading stuff and then applying it as you go.
Yep. I'll read it that morning, apply it that night, and call it good.
Cool.
There we go.
One note, by the way, regarding the Gap books, because I was thinking about this the other day. You've had like some fiction books in here and stuff like that. And people always ask me, like, what sort of fiction books do you like to read? And I'm like, I don't read fiction books. Is there something wrong with me?
Yes.
And I kind of had this moment of clarity. So this is my definition for this. Okay. And you can totally take this apart if you want to. But I kind of view the nonfiction books, going back to like the reason why we started Bookworm, we wanted to read more books and we wanted someone to hold us accountable and apply the stuff that we learned, right? So we knew that this was going to have a positive, or we thought anyways, that this was going to have a positive impact in our lives. So the nonfiction books, the types of books that we cover for Bookworm, those are kind of like the vegetables, right? Whereas the fiction books, that's maybe not like dessert isn't, you know, maybe that's taking it too far, but that's like the less nutritious stuff. It's the stuff that tastes good, okay? Which is completely fine. If you like eating that stuff every once in a while, go ahead and do it. But I recognize that because I am weird, I have developed the taste for the vegetables to the point where like I'm not even tempted by the raspberry cheesecake. Does that make sense?
I think so, but you should read fiction.
Probably. Anyways.
I've been reading Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens, lately. It's very good.
All right. So if you want to recommend a book, you can do so at the club. You can go to club.bookworm.fm and you can log in, go to the recommended books section, make sure that you add the book that you want, and then also vote for it, because we look at the number of votes when determining what books we're going to cover next. And you can also find a list of all of the books that we have covered by going to bookworm.fm/list, as well as all of the books that are planned or upcoming.
Now, there's a few ways you can get involved with the show now, because Mike was gone and I got overzealous. And the classics right now are leave us an iTunes review, join the club, club.bookworm.fm. That's definitely where we hang out the most, I think. Share your action items on the club. That's something we've been doing lately, of posting the action items on the club, so you can ask us questions about them, follow up with them, et cetera, et cetera. What else here? Club.bookworm.fm/membership. We've mentioned a few times the live show. There's some folks in the live section right now. You can chat with us while we record. You can hear the raw, unedited. You know, we even do a little bit of a thing before we start recording as well. So there's some behind the scenes things that happen there. And I have a few other things I'm thinking about for the premium section. So definitely support the show that way. It's $5 a month. Super easy to get into. Follow us on Instagram. Check out the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, because I have all kinds of cool stuff I'm having fun with.
Follow all the great things.
All the great things.
And come see us at Macstock.
Yes.
And if you're reading along with us, then pick up Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky, and we'll go through that one in a couple of weeks.